This week on Mad World, our weekly Culture Wars wrap, we're diving into what's making news in the US with an expert commentator. Joining me now is political commentator Joe Concha. Joe, thank you so much for your time today. Jumping straight into what's making news, the FBI released new information about Thomas Crooks, the 20-year-old gunman who shot Donald Trump last month in Pennsylvania. Some new information coming out of his search history and the fact that he was able to walk around with a gun in his backpack. It's quite startling. What did you make of this new information?
I don't even know what to make of anything anymore over here across the pond, Maddie, and thanks for having me. The fact that everything we've heard about this assassination attempt from the minute after it happened, quite frankly, has just been completely and totally bizarre. And I think we're beyond even incompetence at this point. I mean, just the fact that here you had a random 20-year-old kid completely outflanking the Secret Service and local police, brazenly walking around with a scope finder, which is basically something that obviously you use when you're golfing and you want to see the hole from maybe 150 yards out, 200 yards out. That should have been a sign right there. The fact that he was able to sneak a rifle onto those grounds, only 150 yards from Donald Trump. The fact that he was able to get onto the one building where he had line of sight to the former president. And if Donald Trump doesn't turn his head more drastically than he normally does when he's reading a teleprompter because he had to look at a chart, his head would have been blown off and he would no longer be with us. And the fact that, and I'll leave it here, that Donald Trump was allowed to go onto that stage, even though the Secret Service knew that there was an active threat out there. He never should have been allowed onto that stage, and yet someone greenlighted that. And the fact that no one's been fired yet from the Secret Service, some people have been placed on paid leave. The head of the Secret Service had to resign in shame. But the fact that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris have not absolutely demanded that there be accountability and firings and a true investigation into how this happened, it's a whole ball of wrong. And again, this is a 20-year-old kid who basically outsmarted all those people whose one job is to protect the former president. They failed miserably.
And with this new information, Joe, he reportedly had explosives in the back of his car. It's just astounding that he can actually walk around with a gun in his backpack, but then also have explosives in his car in such a crowded rally. You mentioned that no one has been properly held accountable. No one's been fired from the Secret Service. What do you think should be done to kind of hold accountability, but also make sure that this never happens for anyone? It doesn't matter what side of politics you're on. The Secret Service's job is to protect these people in these high-powered jobs. So what do you think should happen from here on out?
I think the site commander, whoever was in charge on the ground that day in Butler, Pennsylvania, he absolutely has to be fired and even investigated. Because, again, I don't know how. I'm not a Secret Service person. I never worked in security, but I have basic common sense like you do. And again, that is, I'll put it this way. I was at Donald Trump's rally in Wildwood, New Jersey, and that was held about 2 months before the assassination attempt. And I was in the tent behind the rally. The rally was outside. It was about 100,000 people. And when I walked out, I looked up and I saw that the amusement park rides, because this was held on the beach near a boardwalk, they were still operating. And the rides were going up and down, basically not far from the stage. And I was thinking, are we vetting any of those people that are on those rides? Because what prevents them from bringing a gun onto there and getting a perfect line of sight to the president? Then I saw a plane was flying around the rally over Trump, right? It had a Trump banner, a friendly one, but you don't know who that person is flying. Why is a plane allowed to fly over the stage like that? So 100 things I remember thinking that day, like, this does not feel safe to me. And obviously in Butler, Pennsylvania, that all came to fruition, unfortunately. But yeah, I think starting with the site commander, whoever gave the green light to put Donald Trump on that stage when they knew there was an active threat out there, that person should be fired. And then from there, how do you prevent this from happening again? It's a no tolerance policy that if there's any breakdown whatsoever, you lose your job. It's that simple. And maybe put some more people on the ground as well, because clearly they didn't have enough that day to prevent this from happening.
Absolutely. Joe, we'll move on to censorship now. Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg wrote that letter to the House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, where he shared that in 2021, the Biden administration did pressure Facebook to censor COVID-19 related content, which also included articles of humour and satire, these posts. Now, this might not be breaking news to you and I and to some that have followed this situation since it all began in early 2020, but how significant was this admission?
Well, incredibly, it was very significant, but not surprising whatsoever. As you just said,
Mm.
Maddie, this is the type of stuff that we have been reporting on and talking about for many years now. And for a while, you would be called a conspiracy theorist, for example, if you were to say that COVID came from a lab, perhaps in Wuhan, China, that literally studies coronaviruses. John Stewart, the comedian, he had the best line around this. He said, "Look, if there was an outbreak of chocolatey goodness in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where do you think the chocolate came from? Maybe the chocolate factory that's in Hershey, Pennsylvania, that makes chocolate, just like with COVID." And you were called conspiracy theorists if you even uttered that sort of thing. And Facebook made sure they suppressed accounts. We had situations on Twitter. This was before Elon Musk, where people were locked out of accounts simply for sharing information they deemed to be true. And the fact that Zuckerberg now, only now, is admitting it. Well, that's great, Mark. But the problem is that this is something that you should have stopped many years ago instead of after the fact when Joe Biden was clearly across the finish line. So significant, yes. Surprising, not in the least.
Mm. Do you think that it was still a win for those who believe so strongly in free speech? We know that during this time there was so much censorship, and not just online, but the government kind of obsession with controlling everything was running rife. Doesn't matter in what country. It was happening in Australia when I was there. It was just there was so much you couldn't do. But how do you think this will help free speech going forward?
Well, the jig is up, right? The mustard is off the hot dog, is the old saying. And now the fact that everybody knows that this happened and continues to happen, quite frankly, Maddie. I mean, I saw a story just yesterday talking about how Kamala Harris has 85 times the positive mentions on Google searches than negative. 85 times. I wonder if somebody's manipulating that particular algorithm at this point. So, yeah, for free speech, it helps that this omission was made. But the problem is that I don't see it not happening again because these big tech companies are so far to the left. They donate to Democratic causes. They obviously want Kamala Harris to win. So while it won't maybe be as overt, I still think it happens behind the scenes in places that we don't see outwardly. But at the same time, we'll still try to tip the scales towards a particular candidate, a particular party.
Mm. Well, further to that, Joe, Zuckerberg explained that the FBI had warned Facebook about potential Russian disinformation about to be unloaded on the Biden family and Ukrainian energy company Burisma Holdings ahead of the 2020 election. And then the New York Post drops the big Hunter Biden laptop story in October 2020. Facebook then demotes it. Twitter also bans it, censoring the story for weeks while it's being fact-checked. What did this omission say about not just Facebook, but the FBI?
Just amazing, right? Here we have true collusion, right? We always heard about Russia collusion with the Trump campaign. The collusion between the FBI and social media, and obviously the Democratic Party and government in general, all to try to manipulate and control information or suppress it, for that matter. You mentioned Hunter Biden, that laptop 2020, the New York Post, just a few weeks before that election, they report on that story. And what does Twitter do? They lock the New York Post Twitter account until they take down the story or they apologize for the story, as if, who are you, Twitter, to tell anybody that? But they are obviously under pressure from many people in government, many people in the Biden administration, and obviously they were serving those who they support. So, yeah, I mean, it's just so incredible that in the United States of America. I expect this in Pyongyang, in North Korea. I expect it in Moscow and the old Soviet Union for this to be happening in the United States. I
Mm.
mean, this truly is a threat to democracy. And the irony is that the party that says they are here to save democracy from Donald Trump are the ones who are perpetuating it the most.
And one of the most bizarre parts of that situation, Joe, which some people might not know, is that last year an IRS whistleblower, Gary Shapley, he verified, he actually testified before the House Oversight Committee, I think it was, and he said that the FBI had actually verified Hunter Biden's laptop 1 year before the 2020 election in November 2019, despite continuing to push the narrative that it was a product of Russian disinformation. So it's so interesting that the FBI said that Hunter Biden's laptop story was a product of Russian disinformation, despite the fact that they had said, yes, this was Hunter Biden's laptop. Does that just further go into the narrative that this is a two-tiered system?
It goes back to, Maddie, the word we used earlier, accountability, right? So the FBI knew about the Hunter Biden laptop. They knew that it was real. They knew it wasn't Russian misinformation. Yet 51 former intelligence officers signed a letter saying that no, absolutely it is Russian misinformation without ever, analyzing the laptop itself. They just were going by, hair standing on the back of their neck, feelings basically, all again to help Joe Biden. And as far as accountability, okay, well, who from the FBI has been fired over this? Who knew that it was real? Why didn't that person come forward? Was it the director, Chris Wray himself? He still has a job, right? And we saw how James Comey has acted since he left as FBI director, writing all these anti-Trump books and getting Showtime documentaries. And he's on Twitter just railing against Trump and supporting whoever the Democratic nominee is at that particular moment every day. So he clearly wasn't apolitical. And you have to wonder, are all the heads of these intelligence agencies, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the CIA, whether it's the NIH, I could go down the line, are they also compromised? And are they also using their power to weaponize the justice system? I think the answer is rhetorical. Absolutely, yes. And it's disturbing, scary, again, that this is happening in this country in 2024.
And the Republican Party did say that they were going to get to the bottom of this when they won back the House in 2022. So maybe if they come into power, they'll keep that going. Just finally, Joe, it's been over a month now that Joe Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris has now officially accepted the Democratic Party's nomination, but she hasn't done any media interviews, and she's kind of playing into that criticism that the Biden administration doesn't do any media. But now her and Tim Walz will do a joint interview with CNN's Dana Bash tonight. Why do you think the VP couldn't do this herself?
That's a great question, right? Why does she need a chaperone? Why does she need her goofy vice president to be with her? And I think that's just so she only has to answer questions half the time. 39 days, that's the time that it's been since Joe Biden said that he wasn't going to run for president again. Yet he's still somehow president of the United States, which makes no sense. And he's been on vacation basically the entire time outside of one speech at the Democratic National Convention. But why can't Kamala Harris do this on her own? Well, when she speaks outside of a teleprompter, when she speaks outside of pre-written remarks, we have seen what has happened in the past when she was a presidential candidate in 2019, when she's been vice president. Basically, she becomes a human Chernobyl. She is the Ron Burgundy of presidential candidates. Whenever you put in teleprompter, Kamala will read. You take her outside of that teleprompter, especially with all the flip-flopping she apparently has done on all these major issues like energy and fracking and taking Donald Trump's idea of a border wall. Now she's for it, apparently, at least that's what the leaks say, or she's for no taxes on tips, which is a Trump idea. So she's basically trying to rebrand herself without actually explaining why she's doing this. We'll see tonight, CNN, Dana Bash. I would hope that she asks the types of tough questions on inflation, on her idea, Kamala's idea, to have the government engage in price fixing of food costs, for example. Not a good idea. It didn't work in Venezuela, didn't work in the Soviet Union, didn't work in Cuba. It's not going to work here. I would hope she's asked about that. I would hope she's asked, how did you go from saying that a border wall was racist and medieval to something that you support now? I could go down the line in terms of all the questions I would love to ask Kamala Harris. I guess we'll hear that tonight. And I think America, for the first time, will truly get a sense of who this person is and what she stands for, because to this point, it's been the teleprompter candidacy.
Joe Concha, thank you so much for your time today.
Maddie, always a pleasure. I like the hair back, by the way. Way to keep doing that. That's a good look.
Okay.
I do the same thing.
All for you.
So thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, Maddie.